Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the topic of the debt ceiling came out, let me just remind all of us of something that we know very well, and that is our Democratic colleagues can raise the debt limit all by themselves anytime they want, and there's nothing Republicans could do to stop them. The tools have been available to them all year long, and in fact, Republicans have offered to expedite the process. There is only one reason that our Democratic colleagues refuse to use reconciliation to raise the debt limit. And that is because they would have to specify the amount of debt they want to inflict on the American economy. They want to avoid accountability for this terrible spending spree they're engaged in by obfuscating and not specifying a dollar amount. I think we should be very clear about what's going on here. Mr. Powell, under the Fed's new flexible average inflation targeting, the inflation target remains at 2%, but now it's on an average over an unspecified time frame. Core PCE, the Fed's preferred inflation metric, is running about above 2% over the past 5 years, nearly 3% over the past 2 years, and 4.1% over the past year. So it's above target, it has been above target, and it's accelerating. And yet the Fed has maintained an extraordinary emergency monetary policy stance. It looks to me like this framework appears to be a weakening of the Fed's commitment to stable prices. Now, I know you believe this is transitory, but everything's transitory. Life is transitory. How long does inflation have to run above your target before the Fed decides maybe it's not so transitory?
Well, first of all, the test that we've articulated, I think, clearly has been met now. You're absolutely right. Inflation has run well above 2% for long enough that if you look back a few years, inflation averages 2%. So I think we can say that is taken. It was not the case going into this episode. It had been many years since we had inflation at 2%. So I think the word transitory has different meanings to different people. To many, it carries a sense of short-lived. We tend to use it to mean that it won't leave a permanent mark in the form of higher inflation. I think it's probably a good time to retire that word and try to explain more clearly what we mean.
Well, it still strikes me as just extraordinary that the economy it's long past recovery. We're in a full-blown expansion. Unemployment's down to 4.6. We have record high asset prices. Housing is leading the way to the point where in many markets, houses are just unaffordable for many people. And yet, the Fed's going to purchase $35 billion in mortgage-backed securities in December alone, and scheduled to continue purchasing mortgage-backed securities for the months on end. I would strongly urge you to reconsider the pace of the tapering. Secretary Yellen, I want to follow up on the discussion about payment stablecoins. In the President's Working Group, payment stablecoins were defined, and the definition is, and I quote, "Those stablecoins that are designed to maintain a stable value relative to a fiat currency and therefore have the potential to be used as a widespread means of payment," end quote. End quote. Well, that certainly covers every major stablecoin that exists right now. And what strikes me as perplexing is that the President's Working Group recommendation is that all such stablecoins be required to be issued by depository institutions only. But yet, as you know, the mechanism by which the value of the stablecoin is maintained relative to a fiat currency, they vary significantly. Some arguably look somewhat like depository institutions. Others look much more like money market accounts. Still others look like something wholly new. Why suggest that they all must be regulated the same way and treated as depository institutions?
Well, they all have the potential to be used as a means of payment, regardless of how they are used at the outset when they're introduced. And the structure that they espouse and adhere to, which is that they have a stable value relative to a fiat currency, that is really what depository institutions guarantee.
I would just suggest that we really think this through. I think the very fundamentally different designs suggest that there might be different regulatory approaches. I'm going to run out of time here, so Mr. Chairman, I just want to note that Pillar 1 of the Biden administration's international tax agreement will be the most significant international tax change in 100 years. To implement it, every one of our bilateral our bilateral tax treaties would need to be modified. There is no historical precedent for bypassing the Senate treaty process to implement Pillar 1. Secretary Yellen, during a recent Finance Committee briefing, I asked you to acknowledge that administration would need to come to the Senate for treaty approval to implement Pillar 1. You responded that Treasury has yet to determine whether a treaty will be needed or not. In my view, and that of many of my colleagues, implementing Pillar 1 would require modifications to our existing bilateral tax treaties, and those modifications must be approved by 2/3 of the Senate. The executive branch cannot ignore the Senate on a matter that is clearly our constitutional responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.